Thanks, Aditya. Thanks for being on the podcast. It's
Thanks
always
for having me.
interesting. It has always been interesting to speak to you off the record as well, and
Yes, yes,
really
likewise.
nice to have you. Glad you could make time on a Sunday, on like a
No,
long weekend.
it's always great to talk to you and everyone else at Versatile. It's always been um, cool what you guys are doing with the design space. So I was more than happy when I heard first that you guys are doing this podcast. I was more than happy to contribute.
Right, right. And I just like quickly walk you through the agenda of the podcast.
Sure.
What we have thought of as a core idea, it might change with time, but
Okay.
what we think is that the core focus of this podcast is to bring top talent, top design talent, and we feel that this particular there is like something that differs the top talent from the rest, right? And for
Mm,
aspiring mid seniors, juniors, and sort of product designers, they should have an insight on what sort of differs the top from the rest. And what I also
right.
feel is that if organizations also understand that if they hire the top tier talent, the ROI could be 2x to 3x in the long run. And organizations understand today and are willing to invest on that kind of a talent. They're also ready to pay a premium to hire that talent, right? And
Correct.
if let's say we can have most of the designers in India being at the top, it will automatically sort of it means that we'll build like more well performing products. We'll make sure that all products do like 2x 3x in ROI
True.
with in the long run. And talent could be sort of talent would have something to aspire from or have a benchmark from, right?
True.
So
True.
I just introduce you. So Aditya started as a for his career in data analysis and then transitioned to product design. He has almost like a decade of experience in product design, mostly UX heavy, and currently he's the lead product designer at Tartan HQ. So Aditya, go
Yep.
ahead and you can feel free to introduce yourselves or walk us through
Sure.
your entire career.
Sure. No, I'll add on a little to what Saga just mentioned. Because I started my career in data analytics, I was exposed to a lot of product metrics in the beginning. And a lot of my job involved talking to designers and developers about how the product is performing, what can be done better. So when I started having that discussion, it automatically showed me the potential of being a part of the solution. In data analytics, you're usually pointing out the problems,
Hmm.
where the drop-offs are happening, how well is it performing, why people are taking too much time on a particular flow. And then I realized I do want to be part of the solution, and I think I have a better idea of how I can be a part of that solution. Um, of course, at that time, UX was not a very, very big field. This is, I'm talking 2014, 2015. So it was there, of course, but it was not as widespread as it is today. There aren't so many
Hmm.
product designers role in that time. So I had the freedom to sort of try it out on my own, figure out what I can try doing, learn myself. Um, and the tools were limited. So, the UX laws and the UX principles were not very widespread.
Hmm.
They were there, but even if they were present, they weren't very popular, or they weren't really
Right.
followed everywhere, especially in India.
Yeah.
So that got me intrigued. But because I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, I've seen how the field has evolved, how mature it has become, which is why organizations and groups like Versatile have come about, where there is a demand for top quality talent, and you are at a stage now where you are encountering people with 10 years experience in UX. I
Hmm.
don't think you could have had that in 2015. Maybe you'd have one or two
Correct.
people who could do that, but
Hmm.
today that number is much higher, and we've had much more product experience, and we've learned a lot also. The startup cycle has evolved. Even the designers' careers have evolved. And this definition of product designer has evolved a lot in my own experience.
Hmm.
Like you mentioned, I have a very UX heavy background, so I come from that perspective, which also means I've had the chance to deal with a lot of stakeholders. So we are not just designers, that's the one thing, like you mentioned, right? Um, what separates the top talent from the rest is,
Yep.
in my opinion, it's really the understanding of the role of design is much bigger than just pushing pixels. Uh,
Hmm.
and it's really all just about creating this environment where design has a much bigger contribution than it used to have
Hmm.
in the final stakes of the product. Uh, we are dealing with the CEOs, the founders, the CMOs, the sales head, uh, and just as tech has a very important role, UX or design has an equally important role to make sure that we are putting out the right product which is aligned with not only the business goals but also the users.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
people who understand that expanded role of designers will definitely go on to become the top 1 or top 5% talent in the design industry. Because
Right.
uh, and it also takes a certain amount of self confidence, because design is not traditionally viewed that
Hmm.
in that light. So
Hmm. Hmm.
as a
Hmm.
designer, you also have to push your agenda. You have
Correct.
to make it known that the role of UX can be much greater than you're giving it.
Hmm.
And Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Communication is a big part of our job description. Good
Hmm.
communication.
Hmm.
So, and the one thing I've noticed recently, since I've become a lead product designer, I was a lead product designer in my previous organization to Zoop. Um, I was dealing a lot with product managers, and one thing I realized is the overlap of product managers and UX designers. We
Hmm.
have a lot of similar tasks and requirements when it comes to
Correct.
creating a product, right?
Correct.
Whether it is data analysis, user stories, roadmap flows, all of that.
Hmm.
But side topic, what fascinated me there is how few number of designers actually end up becoming product managers. It's very
Correct.
surprising. I
Correct.
would assume that since the roles are so overlapped, many more designers would transition to product management. But at the same time, I realize that design as a field is so deep that I have 10 years of experience and yet I have a lot more to learn.
Hmm.
So it's not like I would consider transitioning to product management, but excuse me. I think I have so much more to learn in design itself.
Hmm.
Maybe I'm not even done with that.
Right.
There's much more to, and the industry is also maturing a lot more in terms of UX.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot more to explore there.
Right, right. And I think accessibility to information has been sort of increasing with, like the new designers coming in. And I think what the new designers or the aspiring designers miss is the kind of sort of like, as you mentioned, they are not able to pick up design or look at design from a perspective as it should be looked at, right? They're looking at design as just pushing pixels, which is basically just like
Yeah,
designing a few Figma screens and then getting done with it, not the overall
yeah,
impact on the business. People or designers who can understand the overall impact of design on the business and can understand that what metrics could be moved using product design, and can merge with the founders and growth team or the product team to sort of improve the overall business metrics, I think are the designers that will be that basically will reach the positions where top 1% designers reach to.
absolutely, absolutely. I think that difference of understanding, and it's a dual-sided effort.
Yeah.
If stakeholders like product managers or CEOs want to give designers a bigger role,
Right.
designers have to let that be known that, hey, we are aware of the kind of metrics you need, and we are willing to play a bigger role in this roadmap than
Mm-hmm.
just pushing pixels. So
Right.
we have to instill that confidence in them so that they can come back to us and say, okay, you know what, I trust you to handle much more than just sending us Figma
Hmm.
screens.
Right. Right.
And that's kind of what my job becomes as a lead product designer, right? I find myself, I don't find myself designing very often right now,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
obviously a lot of it is team management and handling performance, critiquing design feedback. But a big part of it allows me to look at the macro of design in the organization and say that,
Hmm.
okay, as a design team, can the product team come to me and brainstorm about these bigger questions? And then I can translate that into design. At the end of the day, we're trying to solve a problem
Hmm.
for the users.
Hmm.
Sometimes what happens in the culture, in product cultures, is PMs come with this perception that, okay, I am the one figuring out the user problem. I just need the design team to design me XYZ screen or XYZ flows.
Hmm.
And then they come to you, then it becomes a very instructional relationship.
Yeah.
That I've given you a PRD, you give me the designs, and that's it. I'll give you feedback, you change it, and you give it back to me.
Yeah.
Sometimes the culture evolves. Mature product environments, what they do is the product manager sits down with not only the designer but also the tech team
Hmm.
and says, okay, this is the user problem we're trying to solve. Can we come up with a solution which is both user friendly and technologically feasible? So when
Hmm.
all three key stakeholders are aligned in the beginning, uh, that leads to a much smoother product roadmap. That
Hmm.
leads to a much smoother sprint also,
Hmm. Yeah.
because then there's little iteration, little to and fro in terms of tech is saying later on that it's not feasible, or UX is not up to the mark, or product has overcomplicated or over engineered the solution. These things happen a lot more often than people like to believe, and
Right.
it really comes down to that mentality, or that uh, I think it's just a general understanding between all the people involved that
Hmm.
this is the role of design, this is the role of tech, and this is the role of product. And I also feel in that context, product manager's job becomes see, we are equal stakeholders in that product, the
Correct.
designer and the developer. So if you're giving me an idea that, okay, this is the feature that I think will solve problem X, you have to also convince me of it, just like you have to convince the other stakeholders of it.
Hmm.
Because if I'm in agreement with you, then of course I can design a solution. But if I
Right.
also don't know what you're coming at, I will simply design it and give it to you. I
Correct.
may not fundamentally agree with you, but
Hmm.
if this happens more often, then you end up with a product where nobody can really take ownership.
Hmm.
The design team will be like, yeah, I made whatever I had to make because the product team asked me to do so. And the product manager was like, oh, I made whatever because I think I made whatever and it was agreed upon by everyone.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, the product comes out very half-baked. And this is something that a lot of product teams suffer from,
Hmm.
uh, especially in India, because it's a very competitive market.
Correct.
So, and then speed is a whole other, aspect of it,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
amount of time people get to do things. I'm sure if you and I start talking about that, that's a whole other podcast in terms
Yeah.
of what is the reasonable timeline. And there's so many variables. But yeah, I would say that the role has to be something where everybody is contributing and everybody is equally responsible for making sure that we are
Hmm.
willing to create a bigger role for us.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
how design as an industry also evolves, right? That's how you're hiring 1% talent, and that 1% talent's expectations are also very high. That if
Correct.
you're paying a premium for that talent, the deliverables of that talent are more than just giving UX flows or user
Yeah.
flows.
Yeah.
Uh, there is a seat of at the table for design,
Hmm.
and that also eventually on a greater level, I feel would lead to more designers becoming founders or more designers
Yeah.
becoming product managers. That's
Yeah.
something I've seen very little in India. And
Hmm.
I've spoken to so many people, some colleagues abroad also, where even there it's not very common.
Hmm.
But it is a very interesting aspect which I've been fascinated with, which is, how do designers perceive their growth chart?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like I am currently a lead product designer.
Hmm.
Um, do I continue being a lead product designer in different organizations, or do I see myself growing into something bigger, something more overarching? Do I want more responsibility of the product?
Hmm.
Which is to say, do I become a design-based product manager, or
Correct.
then do I become a design-based entrepreneur?
Hmm.
So those are the bigger questions I think people at my experience and role are
Hmm.
probably starting to ask themselves.
Yeah. Because
Yeah,
I think once you sort of have your pathway set to becoming like managing like a design team and sort of overseeing all the operations, understanding how business operators function, how product functions, how things happen, how metrics sort of move, then you can take like a bigger leap. And once you have covered the journey of becoming one of the top designers, then you can sort of also understand how you can sort of, like the journey in itself is so fascinating that it teaches you a lot about how to run business overall, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
if you are striving to sort of know the org from in and out and understanding how the business functions, how metrics functions, you are automatically on a journey to like being one of the top talent in the industry. And
True.
I also wanted to ask you like a very interesting question. A lot of designers today have their days planned, right? Or have their weeks planned, or have their quarters planned. And होता क्या है कि they do not have like a single approach on how do you reach uh, like they basically don't have a roadmap for themselves where they would have a roadmap for the product itself, but most of the designers don't have a roadmap for themselves because most of the time product or product requirements drive their career, right? कि
Right.
founder ने ये बोला है, growth ने ये बोला है, product management ने ये बोला है, or business
Correct.
requires this, then they sort of do something, right? But the time that they sort of spend in the entire career might or might not be pushing them to become what they actually strive for, right? So how should a designer design their sort of work hours, timings, or their lifestyle to make sure that they have the right approach to be one of the best designers in India?
That's a great question. I think very few people actually talk about this, the personal roadmap. Uh,
Hmm.
I also don't think people ask this question until they reach my age,
Hmm.
because as a junior designer,
Hmm.
your path is so clear, right? You
Hmm.
become an associate product designer, and then a product designer, and a senior product designer, or whatever that position is in bigger tech companies, is product designer one, two,
Yeah.
three, all of that.
Yeah.
The professionally that path is very set. But personally, I have noticed that. like you rightly said, in the workspace, as a design manager, my roadmap is determined by the product roadmap. Uh, but also as a design manager, I have to see something that my team's performance and my team's growth. The one thing I love
Hmm.
about designers is uh, there is always a demand for being stimulated
Hmm.
creatively. My design team constantly comes to me and tells me, "Hey, this set of tasks that we just did, it's not been as challenging as I thought it would be. Is there
Hmm.
something else we can do? If we have time, can we do something else?" So they're
Hmm.
personally very enthusiastic about that. I feel like in order to build that personal roadmap, I have to definitely look at the macro industry and understand what is happening in design. And that is
Hmm.
something that you and I have noticed is coming up a lot more, right? There is a
Hmm.
lot more design transparency in terms of the salary, the growth chart. What does a designer's growth look like in a country like India?
Correct.
In 10 years, there are positions like VP of design.
Hmm.
JP Morgan has a position called VP of user experience, which needs about 9 to 10 years of experience. So I'm very curious as to what kind of role does that look like.
Hmm.
There is director of product design in bigger organizations. More importantly, if I look at the macro and I see that uh, as a senior designer, how big is the design department within that organization and what kind of role does it have, right?
Right.
Uh,
Right.
uh, that should probably determine my personal growth chart because as a designer, like I said, if I there's parallel thoughts here. One thought is that how do I perfect my craft? That's the
Hmm.
technical stuff.
Yeah.
I have learned UX. I want to implement the principles of UX. I will learn how to work with AI. I will learn how to work with information architectures and learn those very technical things of my field. Then there is the other side, the more personal side, which is as a designer, what am I seeing myself? What do I define as a successful designer?
Hmm.
Right? It could be the head of design at a smaller company, which has more control, right? Which has more flexibility. So for example, Tartan, we are still a startup. It's a
Hmm.
young organization. We started in 2021, I believe. So design has a very interesting role. At the same time, it has some flexibility. A lot of people are very hands-on. They're very encouraging to pick up these things yourself.
Hmm.
In a bigger organization, that roadmap looks like okay, the processes are already established. Design has a very definitive role to play, and you, as the head of that department, have to reach those business goals.
Hmm.
Uh, my personal roadmap has to be defined by what scale do I want to operate in.
Hmm.
At 9, 10 years experience, I may want to have more control over the product. Therefore, I might want to go to a startup.
Hmm.
Or I may want to be in a much more mature product environment and be part of a much bigger organization where I may have a
Hmm.
smaller role, but a more impactful role because
Yeah.
the product there is already live and it's already scaled up.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I get to learn a lot more.
Yeah.
Then from there, I think a lot of designers have to ask themselves, like, where does the path take you now? Do you
Hmm.
continue to become a head of design at bigger organizations and just, excuse me, do the same role in different organizations or different scales? Or do you consider yourself transitioning to a more, wholesome role, like a product manager? Because
Hmm.
I've met a couple of designers who, after 10, 12 years in the industry, they were like, I think it's time for me to become a product manager. It also
Hmm.
stems from a certain frustration that
Yeah.
as designers, they never had the control over the product like the
Hmm.
PM side. Now
Hmm.
they feel like, I've done this enough and I know enough about a PM's role that I can handle it on my side. And then they
Correct.
also bring a very unique design perspective to it.
Hmm.
So either they double down on their craft and follow the designer's route, or they decide to transition their career. At the same time, it has to be transitioning into something relevant.
Hmm.
Like a UX designer turning product manager makes a lot of sense, but
Yeah.
a UX designer going into sales, maybe not as much.
Hmm.
So the kind of transition that I'm talking about is that. And of course, on a bigger scale, maybe they may even decide to become a founder. They
Hmm.
may they may know enough to be like, you know what, I think I have an idea of a product of my own, and I
Hmm.
think I have the ability to start it on my own. I know enough people.
Yeah.
Um, Another very less thought of idea is my relationship with tech or
Hmm.
coding.
Hmm.
Do I consider myself to start learning front end?
Hmm.
Because basically, as a designer, it's like plugging in all the remaining gaps you have. If
Correct.
I think I've perfected my craft, I may want to go to the engineering side and have more control there, right?
Hmm.
Not only does that open you to a higher pay bracket, but it also opens you up to a bigger industry where
Correct.
there are some very, very few UI UX engineers like we've heard of that position,
Hmm. Hmm.
and only the biggest organizations currently hire for it. But that
Correct.
kind of person is highly talented
Hmm.
and is able to seamlessly blend between tech and design.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it really it I believe to answer your question, it'll be a mix of my personal goals, my relationship with the field of design, and where I see myself in the broader picture of the design industry. Do I
Hmm.
am I more interested in working in established organizations or working in startups?
Hmm.
Or am I just interested in breaking out from all of that and starting something of my own?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's probably what can determine my roadmap um, at a certain stage. Some people even do it in the first 2 3 years, but
Hmm.
I do strongly believe that not everybody may agree with this approach, but I do strongly believe that anybody who's gotten into UX should probably do core UX for at least 5 years before going
Absolutely.
into anything
Absolutely.
beyond that. UX is not the
Absolutely.
kind of field that you can, like even front end is the kind of thing that you can become a front end developer for 2 years and then transition into back end.
Hmm. Hmm.
UX is not the kind of thing that you can't, and it's not because there's so much there is a lot to learn, but it's really how uh,
Impact happens,
frequently
right?
have you how
Yeah.
the impact happens, how frequently have you practiced UX in different environments?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
I've been able to do UX for a bank. I've been
Hmm.
able to do UX for a medical clinic. I've been able to do UX for an e-commerce website. That variety, I've even done UX for sports analytics. Like
Hmm.
the variety of UX that I've been able to do. So I take a craft of UX and I practice it in different environments. That experience is very critical for me
Yeah.
to do anything, whether it is become a design leader or become the head of design or become an entrepreneur myself. I
Yeah.
think that's something I would probably put a lot of weightage on.
Yeah, I think it's about asking the right questions based on your context on where you want to be, right?
Yeah,
In your head, where do you see yourself in the let's say like the next year, and then sort of steadfasting your approach, not just to design requirements that organizations give you, but also to make sure that you decide your own journey and you sort of seek for guidance to different
yeah,
people. And also, as you said, like growing, I was speaking to one more designer. They also believe that, growing steadily and slowly is better than sort of going and learning 10 different things, because until you sort of
yeah,
make an impact, and the impact sort of happens with time, right? It doesn't happen like overnight. It
correct.
happens because like you're working in a real world scenario, there are businesses involved, and I know so many startups who start making the kind of, like, I'll just talk about bootstrap startups. Bootstrap
Yeah,
startups start making money in their fourth or fifth year, like the kind of money they would imagine, right? So exponential
correct,
curve happens later on. And if you're
true,
part of an early stage startup, you would have to see the 0 to 1 and then have your
correct,
design skills incorporated to, like get take the startup to where it would be in the next 3 to 4 years.
correct.
Yep.
That requirement and to understand the difference between the two is also so important, like you said, right?
Yeah.
Being a designer going into a bootstrap startup, I should not have any wrong expectations of, oh, but I thought
Yeah.
bigger organizations do design in such a way. Yes, but
Correct.
you're not in a bigger organization, you are in
Right.
a startup. So
Right.
your contribution as a designer might look very different to, say, your contribution as a designer at Amazon.
Hmm.
But so at the end of the day, I think the person has to be very comfortable with that choice of theirs and very aware of, okay, this is the
Yeah.
choice I've made and this is the impact that it can have right now.
Correct. Correct.
I think that becomes a very important thing. Yeah.
Awareness is the right word, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, okay, if you're talking about impact, what we'll also do is we'll sort of, and what we believe at Versatile is that impact takes time, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
happen overnight, and taking time is the right thing to do. So I
True.
just want to ask, like, in your entire career, I'm pretty sure, like, I've spoken to a lot of 8 to 10 year product designers, and when I ask them about impact, they just say that, the biggest impacts are like 3 to 4. But when I speak to junior designers, they're like every month is like an impactful month, right? So that's the difference that I see with maturity kicking in. And like,
Yeah.
if you would have to mention one of the biggest impacts that you have made in your career, what would that be? And how much time did it take to sort of, happen?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. One of the very impactful experiences that I've had, it was impactful for both me and the work that I did. Um, this was during the peak of just the beginning of the pandemic. I got into this, I got this role as a senior UX consultant at this agency called VMLYNR.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a very fantastic team. It's owned by the WPP group that owns, Ogilvy and all the other ad agencies. So VMLYR is, excuse me, it's a product agency where
Hmm.
basically they are only focused on uh, designing technical experiences for organizations, for their clients. And they have all the big name brands like Ford, Dell. In India, they have a lot of big banks like IDFC Bank, Edelweiss Mutual Funds, Mahindra Finance, Jindal Steel. The idea is they're all consultants, but they are the term they used very frequently was CX, customer experience. And that included everything from UX to copywriting to brand strategy to tone, tone of voice, um, to development, technical skills. Uh, Everybody in the team had a very specific role. So when I was the UX designer, I specifically had to do information architecture, user flow mapping, wireframing. I did not even have to go into UI or copy or imagery. There was a person dedicated for that. So the thing I learned there is when you're working with such specialists in every field on a bigger project, and we worked on very high stakes projects. Uh, that was a very impactful role because we were working with big banks, big
Hmm.
consumer organizations where the scale of deployment was very big.
Hmm.
At the same time, there were so many people involved, and yet it ran very smoothly, especially during the pandemic when it was the first time. So things
Hmm.
were generally very uncertain, but it ran entirely remotely. That was a very impactful role because A, I got to learn a lot about UX, and this is in fact where I learned about UX having a greater role than just giving information architecture.
Hmm.
I was part of these pitches where we were talking to the stakeholders like the CMO of a big bank or the director of Jindal Steel,
Hmm.
right? And we are having very real discussions about this is the kind of impact the product we'll design for you will have
Hmm.
on your business, on your to your stakeholders. That was a very impactful role because, like I said, I got to learn so much about UX as a field. I worked with very experienced people in a very smooth operating kind of way. So
Hmm.
it was a showcase of good skills and good planning.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, the products we came out with had so much scale and impact that it taught me a lot about, okay, this is what it looks like on the other side of things. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
before that, I used to mostly work with a lot of startups.
Hmm.
So I was used to a certain style of,
Hmm. Yeah.
deployment.
Yeah.
Everything was a test, everything was an MVP. Here, it was like established products.
Hmm.
You know, for example, I was part of a team which was designing with the MetLife design system.
Hmm.
PNB MetLife had a collaboration in India, right? So they were supposed to use MetLife's design system. Now, MetLife has such an established design system. It has a full platform where you can download the system, and that
Hmm.
design system was worked on by 4 or 5 designers across the world.
Okay.
So it was such an established setup. I had never seen something so mature and organized till then,
Hmm.
wherein there were clear guidelines on how to use something. And MetLife is a huge organization. But that's
Hmm.
when I also realized the impact that UX or UI can have on these bigger organizations because here it was like the design system was working the way it was supposed to. That
Hmm.
there is a new product coming up, but there is an existing library which can simply have to be appropriately plugged and played into the system.
Right.
And this is the kind of real world financial and time impact that it would have on these projects. And like I said, I worked with so many experts who've been doing this for much longer than I have. That
Hmm.
was a very impactful role. I think that also changed my ability to perceive UX and explain UX to other people.
Hmm. I think you at least
Before
should have
that,
like one break in your career that exposes you to products. So, like working with startups is one thing where you understand the grit and understand how long it takes to do things. And you should
yeah,
also have like a experience, or if you don't have that kind of experience, just talk to people on understanding how a big deployments at scale look like, and how can sort of
exactly.
small decision can change a lot of things and even can move metrics, business metrics at
It
scale.
does. It changed my way to approach design. It changed
Hmm.
the way I even explain design to other people. It changed a lot.
Hmm.
And more importantly, the people that I worked with, uh, it taught me so much about how these people operate, how specialists around the world operate. And
Hmm.
this was a team in India, but we had clients from all over the world. So
Yeah.
there was no system of, oh, it's an American client, it would only go to the American counterpart. We would be doing the same work, and we would be doing the same amount of research for the customers there.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it also showed me that UX is such a field that you can create and design products for other markets if you're
Yeah.
doing it right, if you're following
Yeah.
the processes correctly.
Hmm. And coming to the next question. Where do you like take inspiration on a daily basis, and what are the things or what are the areas in product design that you'll take inspiration on? And where do you find these inspirations? So this is basically this segment of the podcast is so that people or product designers who are looking at it can sort of go to the right sources to take their information, because a lot of information today is like cheap courses, cheap tactics, cheap hacks, right?
Right.
Shortcuts on Figma, all of that. So if you can
Yeah,
tell us like where do you
I think
constantly
that's a
go for
great
your
question.
design inspiration, it will be like really helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, I know that's a great question. So of late, I have been following this platform called Mobbin,
Okay.
Mobbin, which is
Okay.
basically it's very simple product. It's a database of all a lot of existing apps, web apps, dashboards that are out there in the market.
Hmm.
So say they have something like they have the Swiggy app, they have the Zomato app, they have the PayPal app.
Hmm.
It's a complete database of all the screens, but organized in the exact flows of the app. So it's
Hmm.
like looking at the blueprint of every app real
Hmm.
time. The reason I
Hmm.
follow that is because unlike Dribble and all, they show all the realistic screens that are live. So
Hmm.
they give me an idea of, okay, this is what the biggest organizations in the world are designing that are
Hmm.
live and that are being used by millions of users.
Right.
So, of course, I could open the Zomato app and see for myself, but the way it's organized in terms of user flow, I can search and index very specific flows like how does a payment flow in Zomato look versus how a payment flow in Swiggy looks,
Hmm.
right? That's a very, very interesting inspiration. I recommend that for UX designers because it gives you practical insight into what products look like.
Yeah.
Sorry. The other thing, in my early days, I have been following this repository for a while. It's called UX Planet. It's on Medium.
Hmm.
UX Planet has been a very, very insightful sort of blog. Uh, they they've had a mix of everything from teaching the design principles, UX principles, to talking about real life case studies. So a
Hmm.
lot of my fundamental knowledge of UX came from UX Planet in the early days. Medium was an up and coming thing that time, and UX Planet was one of the first blogs set up there. So uh, and the reason I came across it was every time I'd do a very simple Google search, right? Like what are the basic UX principles I should follow when designing an app? UX Planet would at that time be the first or one of the first three search results. They've had some very insightful stuff happening um, on that front. Other than that, I definitely try to follow Nielsen Norman Group because they have
Hmm.
always been a very they've been a hallmark in UX design. Uh,
Correct.
this I use for a lot of my documentation knowledge.
Hmm.
People don't often realize that UX designers have to do a lot of documentation. It's not all Figma files and pixels. There's a lot of um, design approach documents, user flow documents, information architecture documents, user interview documents. So Nielsen Norman Group has always been very, very fundamentally important in learning those basics. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think I've learned that a lot. Uh, the rest, I mean, Figma shortcuts and all, I keep looking at. It's always I learn a lot from other designers. To be honest,
Right.
I try to
Right.
meet as many other designers as I can, and they teach me something new. But
Yeah.
yeah, as far as online is concerned, these inspirations have been really, really fundamental in helping me learn design better. Actually,
Yeah, and I think what's cool with Mobbin is that you can just your gap of solving a problem to how you sort of approach data is like very short. Like you can just
yeah,
look at like 10 different payment charters and how they're designed, and you can look
yeah.
at an app that is very similar to yours. So
Yeah, and there is a validation that's already existent in that.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
Dribble में क्या है, it's always it's great design, but of course everybody knows they're not very practical.
It's very
With
visually
It's very
visual.
visually appealing.
Yeah, yeah.
With Mobbin, it's like if I'm seeing a user flow, and if I so in fact I had this the other day where I was going through a floor and I had a certain doubt in the way I designed it.
Hmm.
But then when I saw the same approach being taken on an existing big app on Momin, it gave me
Hmm.
some validation that, okay, clearly I'm not the only one who's thought of this approach. And
Hmm.
sometimes in UX, most people know that the most practical solution is the best solution. So
Correct.
it may seem very simple, but that is in fact what tends to work with users.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's
Hmm. Hmm.
another thing, just adding on to UX designers, giving them a tip here is uh, young UX designers they feel the need to want to stand out a lot. But the
Hmm.
point of UX is not, to visually necessarily stand out. If you can do a good job with that, yes, go for it.
Hmm.
But if you feel that there is a practical solution that you have to compromise on just to stand out, I
Hmm.
suggest you avoid that because
Yeah.
UX has to be very functional, it has to be effective, and it has to be very clean. Um,
Hmm.
the success metrics for UX designer is really functionality, it's not visuals.
Yeah.
Having said that, it doesn't mean that you make visually less appealing apps, but it's
Hmm.
just that you create an experience which is both practical and visually pleasing.
Hmm. Right. And let's say you are hiring like a designer, right? Hypothetically. What are the top five, six qualities that you would sort of look at? And if those are matched, you would sort of ignore everything else, right? What would be those like five, six, 10 qualities that you would look in a product
Sure,
designers
sure. I
while
think
hiring?
yeah, we were just doing some hiring, in fact, so I think that's very fresh in my mind. I think the
Hmm.
one major thing we have here is the ability to uh, understand the brief and read between the lines.
Hmm.
Uh, we are the best UX designers, the kind who doesn't go with instructional approaches.
Hmm.
They're the kind of people who can think for themselves. They're the kind
Hmm.
of people who can take a brief and probably do much more with it than was initially asked for.
Hmm.
Uh, it doesn't mean overworking yourself. It simply means that you know the problem, but you can find more than one ways to solve it. So you're really thinking for yourself. That's one very important quality, to be
Hmm.
thinking for yourself. The second thing would be the ability to be open to learn. I
Hmm.
think people who are very comfortable with feedback, right, and are always willing to learn something more, try something new, uh, that makes a big difference in terms of how they are in the workplace also.
Hmm.
Because designers get a lot of feedback. How do I react to that feedback? And it goes both ways. It doesn't mean that you have to always accept what feedback is given to you, but it also doesn't mean you have to oppose it. You have to be very objective about everything, and the
Correct.
ability to be objective and say that, okay, my solution was not the best, his solution was not the best, this third solution is the best.
Hmm.
It may not be what I came up with, but I'm happy to go and design it. That
Hmm.
ability to be objective is very important. Third,
Correct.
I would think would be self-awareness, which is what
Hmm.
an extension of what we were talking about earlier. That uh, I meet a lot of young designers who just got into the field because they were aware that okay, UX is a pretty hot field right now,
Hmm.
right? And that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. It is just that if you're going to stay in this field, however, you have to be aware of the fact that it is not as glamorous as other fields. The output is also not as glamorous, but if you see that intrinsic value that a lot of us get from good UX, then you should stick on and you should
Yeah.
stay consistent.
Yeah.
That ability to have some stability, to be able to be self-aware at an early stage is very
Hmm.
like rare, but also very preferred. Uh,
Correct.
uh, that sets apart a lot of good designers from great ones.
Hmm.
This
Hmm.
ability.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
Yeah.
think I would say these three things are paramount. And then of course there's other things like being technically sound and all is great. You can always learn those things. I think the
Hmm.
ability to want to learn comes into that factor.
Yeah.
Can you, if you learn how to do those things above and beyond what you already know, I'm confident that you can grow in your own. It doesn't
Hmm.
matter. You don't have to uh, know it right now.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, that becomes kind of important.
Right. So basically, ability to learn, awareness, and openness to feedback is what you would look at while hiring designers, right? And technical
Yeah,
is sort of like would fall as the secondary thing because
yeah,
those things could be automatically be picked up.
they
Like
can
if you
always
can,
be learned.
yeah, if you can learn, I think then it automatically covers that aspect.
Exactly. And objectivity is very important because as UX
Right.
designers, you have to be aware of biases and your own bias and others' biases also. And that
Right.
becomes very critical.
Right. And it's a very cliche question that most of the podcasts have at the end. But if and but this comes from a place of the core of this podcast, which is basically to upskill and get the right information to aspiring designers who want to sort of be at a good position in the future. Might be like basically sort of a stand out from the crowd after a
Huh.
decade of experience, right?
Right.
So, what would be your advice to those designers, and how should they sort of be going and thinking about their entire design career? So, it's not a question on how they should structure their lifestyle that we already covered, but this is more
Right.
of a question on how they should just think of product design in the longer run, and what would be those like key advice?
Yeah, I think as an extension of what I had said earlier, uh, the biggest skill I think they should demonstrate is this ability to um, understand the product beyond their own skill sets.
Hmm.
Uh, their willingness to understand the product beyond just UX would be a key thing, because at a certain stage, right, you're looking at a designer who can take care uh, of course, take care of the technicalities of UX, but at the same time, who equally understands the product like other people, other product stakeholders.
Hmm.
If a lead designer has the same understanding of the product as the lead product or the lead tech, that puts him at par with other stakeholders, and that makes him or her a very dependable resource.
Hmm.
Uh, the If I see that quality demonstrated in a designer, I will know that this person is capable of creating a bigger role for design in the organization and creating driving impact truly.
Hmm.
So I'm not just hiring a designer who pushes pixel, because I'll get 100 of those. I'm hiring a designer who can go above and beyond that and truly like have an impact on the product.
Hmm.
So that, I think, becomes a very uh, important way to structure your roadmap, to go
Hmm.
beyond just your skill sets, and also maybe see that I know what my skill sets can do for the product. uh, how does that push the needle for the product? How does that
Hmm.
impact? Like, can I start asking questions of scale? Can I start asking questions of go to market? Right?
Hmm.
It's sometimes may feel like it's outside the purview of a designer, but if you
Hmm.
start bringing all of that, you start looking at the product as a whole, and you
Hmm.
start becoming a sort of all-rounded designer. But more importantly, you start becoming a key product stakeholder. And for the designers to be a key product stakeholder is a very critical thing, because that
Right.
is when you open yourself up to a greater ceiling, right?
Hmm.
As a designer, you could have a ceiling in the organization that, okay, this is the role they're willing to play. That's it. As a product stakeholder, you are opening yourself up to a better position,
Hmm.
possibly even stake in the company's profits, which is a very,
Hmm.
very important thing.
Yeah.
And maybe it even sets you up internally to become an entrepreneur in the future if that's what you want. So I
Hmm.
think that would really, really set apart designers, that who are willing to understand that design at the end of the day is an impactful role, and it has a key role to play in the success of a product. It is not
Hmm.
simply delivering on PRDs.
Yeah.
It has to be about impact, and that's what most designers are after, anyways. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's what I would
And
say.
I love how we started with impact and closing on impact, right? And
Yeah,
I'm glad because I'm intrigued by this conversation pretty much because I've mostly spent my career in growth and marketing, right? And I've moved
right.
like most of my career is like moving numbers, taking risks, right?
Mm.
And making sure that orgs are profitable, do the business in the right manner, all of that. And I'm fascinated because designers like you are asking these questions at the forefront and then, merging design with that because
Right.
that's what is sort of shifting in organizations today. And
Yeah,
I'm always like interested by these conversations because I get my motive through this, right? Like I've switched
yeah.
to serve product designers now, but I sense that I've taken the right path, and I want
Yes,
to go ahead on
absolutely.
this part to make sure that if the top designers come in orgs, then it will facilitate organizations growth in the right manner because product designers are sort of asking the right questions now, right? And
Yeah.
even like engineers for that matter, because like tomorrow if we start a service for engineers as well, if we hire the top 1% engineers for orgs, that might sort of that might yeah, matlab, I'm pretty sure that it will sort of move mountains in the organizations because
True.
they'll ask the right set of questions.
And that is the definition of top 1%, right? The
Yeah, yeah,
idea is that this specific crowd has a greater impact than the rest of the 99%.
yeah,
And the only
yeah,
way we can have that is truly being invested in the product.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And of course, there is a much greater financial incentive to that also. If
yeah.
designers are constantly asking, how can we improve our ceiling? How can we improve our pay? These are the kind of things we have to do, because we have to strive for a greater role.
Correct.
And if we are wanting it, then organizations themselves will open up those roles to us.
Yeah,
But they
yeah,
need to see from the designers that, okay, these guys are interested in even pursuing these fields.
yeah. Yeah, and today organizations are open. I've spoken to multiple of them, and they're like open to give designers a seat on the table if they bring enough impact and if they sort of speak about
Exactly.
themselves. And as you said, that confidence is like a part of your role, right? And communication is part of your role. You have to drive things in the manner that orgs see the value in product design, what product design can do for like orgs.
Precisely.
Uh,
Precisely.
yeah, but thank you so much for doing this, man.
Awesome.
Great,
No, thank you so
great
much for
time
having
spent.
me.
Yeah.
Likewise, likewise.
Yeah, have you, and thank you for so much for making time on a Sunday for this.
Thank you very much. It
Thanks,
was
man.
great chatting with you guys. Thank you.
Sure. Bye. Thank you so
Bye
much,
bye.
Kumar.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.